My name is Stephen Dubberly. I live in Denton, Texas. I'm music director of the opera program at the University of North Texas. Denton is in North Texas, but every chance I get, I hop into my little Prius and make the drive down to Houston to work with my dear friend and beloved mentor, Lois Alba, and we have shared 15 years together of great joy around music making and music teaching. And I have learned so much from her about Italian opera. And her love for Italian opera is infectious. And I love her dearly. We've worked on many projects together. And under the auspices of the Soma Foundation, we're working now on at least part of Puccini's Trittico. Trittico, of course, means triptych, not the AAA triptychs, but a three-part work. And Puccini did this because he was interested in writing one-act operas. As you know, toward the end of the 19th century, one-act operas became a very popular form of entertainment. I should say at the beginning of the 19th century, of course, Rossini wrote a bunch of one-act operas for Venice, and they were called farse. But what really got one-act operas popular in Puccini's time were the operas by Mascagni and Leoncavallo, which were Cavalleria Rusticana, of course, from 1890, and I Pagliacci. And Puccini wanted to try his hand, he said, as early as about 1904, so about the time he had finished Butterfly, he was interested in writing some one-act operas. And he did indeed get a commission after he'd written Butterfly, after he'd written La Fanciulla del West, after he had written La Rondine. He got a commission from what was quickly becoming one of the world's leading opera houses, kind of an upstart opera house, and that was the Metropolitan Opera in New York. And because he was so well established and highly respected as the greatest composer of Italian opera of his generation, the Metropolitan Opera offered him a huge sum of money to compose an opera for them, and he suggested to them a triptych, a group of 3 one-act operas which would be performed together to make an entire evening. Now, I've got to tell you, each of these one-act operas is about an hour long. So when the Trittico is performed in its entirety, it makes for a very, 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 very long evening. And it is customary very often to perform 2 of the 3 operas. And the operas that Lois and I are working on right now are Il Tabarro and Suor Angelica. The 3rd opera of the Trittico, of course, is Gianni Schicchi, his comic masterpiece. You could not, by any stretch of the imagination, call Il Tabarro or Suor Angelica comedies. Il Tabarro is the least known of the 3. It's a pretty grim piece, but it is beautiful in every way. It is delightful. It features incredible vocal writing, some fascinating characters, and also some wonderful local color. It's set in Paris, along the banks of the Seine River, and we get a lot of Paris. We get the colors. The music itself seems to give us not only the sounds, but the sights and smells of Paris. It's very, very idiomatic, very delightful music, incredible orchestration. Of course, because Puccini was writing for the Metropolitan Opera, and they were even at that time celebrated for their wonderful orchestra. These 3 operas in the Trittico call for huge orchestras, and he was such a master orchestrator and did some amazing work combining sounds and color. What's interesting is if we think of Puccini as the composer of La Bohème, the music that he's writing in 1914, 1915 is completely different. There are influences of Debussy, there are influences even of Stravinsky. There are passages that are so full of color but sound mildly dissonant compared to the earlier music of Puccini. He is experimenting, he is at the top of his form. He's writing music that is so suitable to drama, and music that is just absolutely chock full of emotion. Il Tabarro, as I said, is a rather grim tale. The action takes place on a boat, and we meet Michele, the owner of the boat, which travels up and down the Seine. We meet his wife, Giorgetta, and she is much younger than he is. He's older, his hair is gray, he's lived a full life. He marries sort of a trophy wife, I guess you could call her, and when we meet her, we can see that she is not at all happy and very restless. We start getting a picture of what's going on as we meet the stevedores, as we meet the men who work for Michele. Among them are Tinka, who is a bit of a drunk and rather morose character. We meet Talpa, an older stevedore who's really almost outlived his usefulness to Michele, as well as Talpa's wife, Frugola, who's a bit of an earth mother, and she's a delightful character. And we meet Luigi, rather enigmatic character. He's a fine worker. He tends to be very quiet and keep to himself. But we discover, as we get to know him better, great flashes of passion. And the passion sometimes seems to be violent. And we learn early on that he is an angry young man and that he is a passionate young man. We start putting the pieces together and realize that Luigi and Giorgetta are having an affair. Michele doesn't know about it. And the plot gets incredibly twisted to the point that we understand that Giorgetta no longer loves Michele. He's pleading with her to go back to the good old days, and we figure out, little by little, that they at one point had a child, and that child is now dead. And with the death of that child came the death of their marriage. And now Giorgetta is longing for something else. She's at that point in her life where she's restless and she's sad and doesn't feel loved. Michele treats her as a possession, but he does love her very, very deeply. And he says to her, "Won't you kiss me like the old days? Won't you let me hold you the way we would get up on deck and I would hold you within my large coat. I'd keep you warm. I'd just bring you inside my coat." But clearly she doesn't want to have that relationship with him anymore. And then we see that it is Luigi whom she loves. And in just a great ironic denouement, Luigi and Michele confront each other. And Luigi has already declared that he's willing to kill Michele. But Michele in this fight gets the upper hand and stabs Luigi to death and wraps him up in his coat. And in this very stark ending, Giorgetta comes onto the deck thinking she's going to meet Luigi. Instead sees Michele and he says, "Come here, sweetheart. Let me embrace you as in the old days." And he opens his cloak to reveal the dead body of her lover. It sounds so macabre, it sounds so horrible, and truly it is. This is really the crowning achievement, far more than Tosca, of what we call verismo in opera. This is opera that is showing life at its seamy, nitty-gritty worst. And yet at the same time it's done with such love, with such color, with such passion, and with such true psychological insight into these characters that I believe Il Tabarro is a neglected masterpiece. We are in love with this piece. We are in love with the singers whom we are helping as they learn Il Tabarro, and we are enjoying it so very much and looking forward so much to sharing it with an audience. We're also doing Suor Angelica, Sister Angelica. That's a much better known story, the story of a nun. Again, Puccini loves in these stories letting the cat out of the bag very slowly, as opposed to his earlier operas that seem to be more presentational, where you get a lot of information at the beginning. It takes us a while to understand in this convent that the young nun, Sister Angelica, again rather quiet, keeps to herself, is known for being very, very kind and compassionate, and known for being a healer, a person who has particular knowledge of herbs and potions. Little by little, we understand that she comes from a very wealthy family. Then we understand that she is in the convent as a punishment, that something terrible happened to her when she was a teenager. Finally, when her aunt comes visiting, and her aunt is a princess, we discover that Suor Angelica, as a teenager, got pregnant and had a child, a little boy. And it's been 7 years since she's seen him. She gave birth, he was taken away from her, and she was dispatched to this convent. She has lived a life of quiet repentance, and she thinks that her aunt is here to forgive her and to renew a relationship. Instead, it turns out that the aunt is here for her to sign some papers so that her inheritance will go to her sister. And we discover little by little that the child who was taken away from her is now dead. Died, in fact, several years ago. Nobody has bothered to tell her. And this sweet, tender, compassionate girl realizes that she has no more hope in this life, and starts to fantasize and hallucinate about being with her baby boy in heaven. She does something tragic. She uses her own knowledge of herbs to prepare a potion for herself and commits suicide by poisoning herself. Then she is seized by a great fit of despairing conscience and says, "What have I done? Oh God, forgive me." And a beautiful thing happens, a miracle happens. She looks up into the heavens through a bright light and sees the Virgin Mary herself, comforting her, and with the Virgin Mary as her own baby boy. It's a beautiful fantasy story, so full of tenderness, so full of love. The love not only that we see in Suor Angelica for her baby, but the love that we see for her fellow nuns and the wonderful spiritual fellowship of these nuns, many of whom suffer very deeply as they go about their daily activities. It's an absolutely beautiful and touching story with flashes of great passion, great despair, great violence, and at the end, a spiritual apotheosis, which is absolutely redemptive and absolutely beautiful. We love Il Trittico, we love Puccini, we love young singers, and we love seeing them grow, because these operas have so much to teach them about singing, about style, about the Italian language, about finding a technique that's suitable for declaiming the words and expressing the deep emotions of these characters through the absolutely stunning music of that great master of the theater, Giacomo Puccini. So we are very much honored to take part in this project, and we eagerly look forward to every step in the process, including, of course, the culmination in our performances.